To begin with, I'll just introduce myself. I'm a clinical psychologist with a specialty in child psychology, and I've been in practice for 33 years, seeing kids and their parents in one form or another. About 20 years ago, I got involved in forensic custody work, and so I've been a custody evaluator in New York State. And then about 15 years ago, I became involved in collaborative divorce, and I work as a divorce coach and as a child specialist. My other hats that are kind of an outgrowth of all of that work are in mediation and parenting coordination. So in essence, I work with children and families from almost every angle that you can think of when it comes to the world of divorce. Rosalind?
Hi, everyone, and thanks for being here with us. I'm Rosalind Sedacca, and I'm a divorce and co-parenting coach and founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, which provides valuable resources for parents who are facing divorce, moving through divorce, or transitioning after divorce. And I'm the author of How Do I Tell the Kids About the Divorce, as well as co-host of a radio show and podcast titled Divorce, Dating, and Empowered Living. In addition to personal coaching, I've created several ebooks and e-courses and programs on successful co-parenting, as well as an 8-hour course on anger management for co-parents. And I also have virtual programs on dating after divorce for co-parents. And all of that information can be found at childcentereddivorce.com. The focus of my work is on building trust, respect, and rapport between parents as early on in the divorce process as possible. Allison is seeing people once they're in the midst of divorce and often high conflict divorce. My goal is to get both parents so early on that they learn and that there are consequences for the decisions they're making, and hopefully get them to make more conscious, wise, cooperative decisions. So my programs are designed to help divorce professionals better support divorcing parents so they're more prepared to co-parent in the months and the years after their divorce. And that means asking the right questions and reminding parents that every decision they make either promotes or destroys peace and security for the entire family. So I just wanted to start by saying COVID-19 should be a reminder that the co in co-parenting is about cooperation, communication, and coordination. And with that in mind, one of the most important things I tell every client right up front is there are consequences for every action and decision you make as parents. So put yourself in your child's shoes for every decision you make now and always, and it'll guide you in the right direction. And I think that's something that we can take away and share with clients, especially at this point in time. So Allison is going to start with some questions that we've pre-prepared because we know that there are certain things that everyone has on their mind, and I think Allison has some questions that are extremely important right now as takeaways, and we can go back and forth with some of these questions and see if they're of value to you. So thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Roz. I wanted to begin by referencing a decision that came out from Bronx County in New York about 2 weeks ago, May 7th, 2020. It is here printed. I won't read exactly, but this is a decision that comes on the back of a number of administrative orders from the courts in New York State, referencing an obviously high conflict couple, and their divorce was a high conflict divorce. They are exchanging their young children, 2.5 and 4, at the police precinct, and there remains a stay-away order. And what happened here is that once the pandemic set in and New York State went under lockdown, the father was finding that the mother was withholding the 2 little children and saying that because of the pandemic, he could not see them. He had video access, but because they're very young children, their attention spans are not long, and video access was thus very brief, if at all. And so he ended up asking for some kind of emergency relief from the court. The judge's decision here completely favors the father. And the essence of the decision is that, yes, we are in very unusual times. Yes, there are all kinds of questions about security and safety for all of us. And no, you cannot withhold children from their parents. In fact, and Roz and I are going to say this repeatedly, and I think it will become a mantra for today, now more than ever, right? Everything that we're going to say, we're going to tag on now more than ever. Children need both of their parents. They need to know that they have free, unfettered access to both parents, and unless there is some extraordinary set of circumstances to suggest otherwise, the courts are going to come down on the side of access being normal and regular. So that's where we stand legally, at least here in New York, as a beginning. And I wanted that to be sort of the jumping off point, because I know from colleagues, and in fact am involved in a case in which, as soon as we all went into lockdown, the very first thing that happened was an ongoing set of arguments between the parents about what the rules and regulations should be for access when parents are in different locations and children are moving between them, and parents don't know who's in that other house or who's coming into that other house. And therefore, somebody becomes anxious and upset about what that child might be exposed to and whether that child is going to bring the virus home. As an offshoot of that and of this decision, there's been a lot of articles in the media about first responders. And first responders, in a sense, present the counterpoint to this decision right away, meaning there is this sort of special, unique circumstance where a parent may be working in a hospital or, working on an ambulance corps, and any number of frontline businesses, working in a supermarket, and is regularly at high risk, regularly being exposed to the virus. So the question then becomes, what happens then? How do you do regular access when you have that level of risk happening in the family? And I would open that up for discussion. The court is certainly saying visitation access trumps whatever is going on environmentally here. I know I have seen parents take it upon themselves to do things like self-isolate, and those decisions have been extremely painful and require a level of compassion and communication between parents so that the children do not suffer. The children involved are typically suffering regardless, because whatever fears they have about the unknown and whatever fears they have about what could happen to their parents are only heightened by the separation of one parent and the inability to have a physical connection with that parent. So these times are certainly creating for all of us as professionals the requirement, I think, for us to think out of the box, look for out-of-court solutions to these problems, enhance the communication between people who often come to us and say, well, I can't communicate with that person. Well, now you have to. Now it's a requirement, and we're here to help facilitate that. One of the other things I know that I have become aware of is in both intact family households and divorce scenarios, given that children are out of school and that parents are now called upon not only to work for a living, but also educate their children, the stresses are enormous on families. And therefore, the whole balance of labor may be called into question now. You know, whatever the agreements had been about who's in charge of what may need to be rethought, may need to be renegotiated in some way. And it seems just historically, since in general, and I'm definitely making a broad statement here, so please do not shoot me for anything that might be interpreted as politically incorrect, but still, I think broadly speaking, mothers who are at home with children and then also having to work are holding up a larger burden of care. And fathers who may now be at home and working from home, in many of the families that we are seeing, are really stepping up and taking on a larger share of tasks and responsibilities with children, which is a wonderful thing. What happens when that doesn't work may become the kind of issue that comes to all of us that we need to deal with and help parents figure out. Because if, again, children feel like they are losing one of their parents, either physically losing them to depression, to overwhelm, those children are ultimately going to suffer. So all of us are here to try to figure out ways to protect the kids during this time. So I'm raising these questions without actually giving a specific answer. I'm going to turn it over to Roz, who has been very thoughtful about these kinds of issues with the parents that she's working with. And let's hear from her.
Thank you. And yes, I think today we're going to be talking about a lot of questions more than providing sound answers, because there are no exact answers. But by thinking out of the box, it's going to help us and it's going to help our clients to make better decisions. So there's a question that I think that is very relevant for our clients to be asking themselves. And it's one of the most important questions that all co-parents can ask themselves before making any new co-parenting decision, especially today. And that question is, would I be making the same parenting decision if we were still married? Would I be making the same co-parenting decision if we were still married? So when you are married, decisions are usually based on mutual agreement of what's best for the kids. And now the question is, what are your decisions based on? So when you're making inquiries and trying to shift or change the reality of your co-parenting arrangements, are you doing it because it's really in the best interest of the kids, or are other things influencing your decision? And it's so subtle and so easy to be moving in another direction. So does it have something to do with money? Does it have to do with the fact that if you're not sharing the parenting arrangements the same way, then you may not have to be paying as much for child support? Does it have to do with power or control issues? Are you making a parenting decision at this point that's based more on retaliation and getting back at your co-parent for some grievance that you're holding against them? Are you focusing more on blaming or shaming your co-parent and making them wrong in some of the things they've done to you or to the kids? Are you trying to manipulate the co-parenting relationship and the entire balance of who's been doing what because you have an opening now? And are you trying to disrespect your co-parent in front of the kids or to themselves? So it's important for you to be talking to your clients about how the kids are going to benefit from a decision that you're making. Is it truly in the best interest of the kids to even be requesting and changing the situation now? And how will you be benefiting? Is this about your benefit at the cost of your co-parent losing advantages and losing contact with the kids? And how will your co-parent be benefiting from making this shift or change that you're asking about? And if not, what can you do to create a better outcome? So basically, my focus is on the huge number of co-parents who are going to be making decisions, questioning reality at this point in time, who are not necessarily going to be going into the legal system and calling up their legal resources, but are confused or concerned or have questions about what's best for our family. And again, as Allison said, we need to be educating the co-parents on the fact that this is a time for you to be communicating as clearly and purely as possible and really focusing on the children. So by helping clients answer those questions, or by giving them the homework to go back and talk to each other and really come up with solutions that are going to be family focused for the children as well as for both co-parents, it's a good step in the right direction, because long after the pandemic, co-parenting is going to be going on for the rest of this family's life. And if it takes the challenges we're facing today to force parents into making more enlightened decisions, then maybe that's a blessing coming out of this. At the very least, they need to be making decisions that truly are to the advantage of everyone in the family, and especially the children. There's another question that I suggest we also talk to our co-parents about, and that is, what are you teaching your children if you're depriving them of usual access to their other parent, which is what's behind some of the intentions that are going on now, suddenly using the pandemic as an excuse for shifting the parenting plans and visitation and the routine that has been going on or is being planned to be going on, and suddenly you have an excuse to make a shift. And it's important to ask the co-parents a question about, what are you teaching your children through this experience? Because sometimes they don't stop and think, and they need to. They need to realize that children will remember what you're showing them, what you're teaching them, and in the long run, they will resent you as a parent for making the kids feel that you didn't trust or respect their other parents, that you didn't trust or respect them, that you weren't showing them behaviors in how to be fair and to share in life, which parents are always lecturing kids about. Kids will not forget, and they'll figure out alternative motives from parents and resent you when they're grown up. And kids also, if they're feeling that they can't trust one or both parents, will turn in other directions. And that's when we see in the headlines kids moving into bad company, moving into drugs or gangs or other behavior where they're no longer feeling aligned with their parents, and so they go outside and very often become very vulnerable to resources in society that aren't supportive for them. And in addition, if you're playing the game of manipulating the arrangements of parenting, you yourself as a co-parent are more likely to have interference in your personal and private life due to legal inspections, custody disputes, and all the rest of that that's going to start catching up once the courts open again. So parents need to be thinking through some of their whims or some of the accusations they want to make, because it's so much easier to do that at this time, and not thinking about consequences, which is a big word that we want to remind them about at all times. So I have another question that I could respond to, Sonia, but I just wanted to check in with you and see if there were any other questions that are popping up that we could answer.
Yeah, absolutely, Rosalind. Thank you. So from Stephen, how do you pronounce your last name? Coens? Close? Sorry, Stephen. Parent. Hi there. Was I on point with that or not really?
Close enough.
Close. Okay, thank you. I'll take close. Parent coordinators have just recently been reapproved in Pennsylvania. What's the best argument for a parent coordinator when the parents are so at odds with what's best for their children?
So that is a question that's up my alley. So I'll go ahead and answer. First of all, by their very nature, when a parenting coordinator is assigned, it generally means that the parents are at odds about what is in the best interest of their children, right? They're not very successful at making decisions together, and they continue to require a third party to play this very interesting kind of integrated role of mediator, arbitrator, cop, educator, right? To keep them honest to the agreements that they have already made or that the court has ordered. So the best argument for actually putting a parenting coordinator in place in that kind of situation is having a third party in that role hopefully allows the parents over the course of at least 1 year, because usually the arrangement is a contractual one for a minimum of 1 year. It allows the parents to bring disputes into that forum, into that meeting forum with that third party, and to sort out the disputes, to learn something about communication and how to communicate needs and interests more effectively, to perhaps learn more about their children. They may have very different perspectives about who their children are, and sometimes that parenting coordinator, especially when that is a person who is a psychologist with training in child psychology and is able to perhaps access community resources that can be helpful. Sometimes parents actually learn information about their kids that they didn't know before and gain a new perspective on how to think about who a particular child is. I'm thinking of parents who, for example, one parent says that a child has a certain kind of learning disability and the other parent totally poo-poos that and said, no, that's not true, right? And so the one parent who's looking for services then is viewed as kind of histrionic and dramatic and, looking for things, looking for trouble. But the other parent may be viewed as cold and unfeeling and in denial. And so the parenting coordinator can actually shed light, really important light, on who children are and what, in fact, they really need. Does a child actually need services, right? Does a child need certain kinds of attention that may or may not be happening? So that can be a very strong argument for having a parenting coordinator in place.
Wonderful. Another question from Mark Miller. That's a great question. There are often challenges in communicating with both co-parents. What strategies can be tried to reach out to foster better communication between the two co-parents?
Yeah, and that's such an important question, and it's ubiquitous. It goes on forever and ever in the co-parenting situation. Um, One of the ways of approaching this is to ask both co-parents what the intentions are behind their request or their anger about a situation, and let them get to the bottom of the intentions behind it. What is the purpose? What are you trying to have happen or change as a result of making this demand or this request? And sometimes that will lead you down a line of communication where you're saying, yes, but what are you doing? What is the real reason behind that? And what is the reason behind that? And sometimes the outcome is different than what they initially were requesting or what they initially thought they were wanting when you keep getting down to the bottom line of it. And is that truly a question about the best interest of your child? Or did it turn out to be that the intentions were a little askewed and it really wasn't in alignment with what's best for the children? So it's important to focus on intentions. And you also can ask the question about, do you trust that your co-parent loves and cares about your children? If you can get a yes early on in that communication, then it helps you establish the fact that you two are both on the same side. You're both on a team. You're both moving in the same direction, caring about little Susie, little Johnny, and what's best for them. So if you could ask some questions that start getting you to yeses about trusting your co-parent, the person you had this child with, the person you loved and had a life with, sometimes it can ease the way into talking about, well, what's the most effective way of handling this then? What if we asked this question? Or what if we tried this? Or what if we did this? Or what if we asked the kids about that? And keep coming up with solutions that open new doors and open new ways and perspectives of thinking about it. We all get stuck in a pattern of thinking that this is the only way it has to be, or this is the way it is and should be. And I think the coronavirus has shown us all that one incident can throw a loop in so many different directions that take us into areas we never thought. And that's the same in our relationships. So we can stop, look around, and really address what's important for us as a family, what's important for us as co-parents, what's important for our kids. How do you think the kids would feel about what you're asking or what you're requesting? What is the impact on them? And going in a direction like that, when they have to be thinking about the consequences, the outcomes in the alignment, would make a big difference for the outcome of this experience in another direction than it has been going. And that's the idea, is to move things into another direction so that maybe we can get both parents to start being more aligned and see things in the true meaning of what they're trying to get to. And it's never an exact process, but we have to keep trying other strategies to move around things, to negotiate around things until we find a way that we can get both parents to say, yes, let's try this. And that, of course, is a better outcome.
I would just piggyback on what Roz has been saying and add to that from a strategic perspective that I always find that trying to help parents improve their communication begins with slowing it down. People are, particularly when they are emotionally hijacked, they tend to forget very basic rules of communication, like turn taking, right? And people talk over each other and they want to make sure, they're the one that's heard, and but, and there's no effective communication when that's happening. So whoever they are working with, whether it is a coach or a therapist or even an attorney, that person is in a great position to facilitate a slower turn-taking way of speaking to one another. Everybody wants to feel that they've been heard. Everybody wants to feel that they've been considered. And the only way that the parents that we work with have a prayer of feeling heard and considered is if the pace slows down. So I would add that to what Roz has been discussing in terms of all the different sort of attitudes and values that we want parents to hold foremost in their minds, and to not just be hijacked by their emotions.
So another question from Alla Reutberg. This question is, any suggestion on strategies regarding the pandemic where each parent genuinely has a vastly opposing view of the dangers involved? So one parent is thinking this is all propaganda, and the other parent is thinking we need to stay completely isolated.
So, I mean, this is the state of the society that we're living in right now, right? where everything feels politically polarized, and why wouldn't the parents be polarized in very similar ways? And certainly everything that I've been reading lately speaks to it is not successful to actually go after that polarization. You will never convince somebody who holds a deeply opposing perspective that your perspective is the right one, or the rational one, or the reasonable one, you know. And if only they could hear it, and they would know it, and they would come to your side. There's tons of research that tells us that doesn't work. So one strategy in a situation like this with co-parents is to use a trusted ally out in the community. So as an example, you know, there actually is science that's at play here when it comes to an epidemic. And the children's pediatrician might be a really good resource in the community that both parents trust, who they might listen to, and whose perspective could be brought in, right? As a strategy for being able to posit an alternative perspective. Okay?
I like that. In addition, you might want to focus on some of the basics of communication skills and really trust active listening, because very often we mishear and messages and make mistakes in what we make assumptions in what our partner is trying to say or do. And sometimes we're off kilter with that. Not always, but sometimes we are. We hear things because that's what we're expecting. And so it's really good to clarify when whatever we're hearing and saying, so what you're saying is, and then paraphrase and repeat back those statements. And then you could say, so if that's what you believe, I agree about this part. The part that troubles me is that part. And you're honing in a little bit more onto what's the most relevant part, and see if you could find some areas of agreement. If you can get back to the agreement about loving the children and bring all the conversations and the discord back to that, if that's a mutual state and you could achieve that mutual feeling of, yes, we both love the kids, what is really best for our kids? It takes it out of that wild and woolly abstract place, and it brings it back to what is best for us and our family, and talking in we language. And that helps the communication be more aligned and forward thinking in finding solutions for us and our family.
Another question from Savannah Kuntz. Do you like any of the co-parenting apps such as Co-Parenter, Our Family Wizard, App Close, etc.? And if so, which is your favorite?
Well, this is something that I work with a lot with families, and yes, I think there's a big benefit in using these co-parenting scheduling tools. It reduces conflict. It puts everything in writing directly where people can see the responses. It keeps them cleaner and less conflict oriented. There's one called Two Houses that I like that has a lot of valuable components to it, and the cost is lower than many of the others. But regardless of which you're using, I find that it keeps the communication cleaner and clearer, because there's a possibility of someone else reading that and looking at it, and it reduces the antagonism, especially in the conversations. Allison?
I agree, totally. The only one that I have experience with is our Family Wizard, and I've used it a number of times. And I agree that when people know that their conversation can be monitored in real time, it can make a very significant difference. A lot of people don't realize it isn't the what that's the problem, it's the how. So it isn't what they're saying, but it's how they're saying it. And these apps can be really helpful in illuminating tone, because again, a therapist, a coach can step in and say, I hear the content of what you're trying to ask for. I'm wondering if there's another way that you can say this.
So the only app that I'll add to that list is the FAIR app, FAYR. It not only tracks communications, it has the ability to have a shared calendar, it tracks expenses, and sort of just simplifies everything and streamlines it. So that's the only other one I would add to that list.
And let me just add one other factor that I like about using these resources, is that it also keeps parents from asking the kids to be their messengers, which is very destructive for kids, even kids, older kids who are teenagers. We can't depend on them to get the message right. Sometimes they will mishear it intentionally just to create a little mischief. And it isn't fair to kids to be our messengers. We don't want them to become spies for the parents. We don't want them to become confidants for the parents, and we don't want them to become messengers. So when you have a clean message that says, I'm going to be an hour late and I'll be there at 7:30 instead of 6, then there it is in writing, clear for everyone, and there's no disputes about it. It also eliminates a lot of unnecessary phone conversations for co-parents who just don't do well on the phone, and after talking for 3 minutes are suddenly discussing 2 weeks ago and getting into drama. So it eliminates unnecessary communication and keeps things rolling along in a more positive way.
Another question from Mark Miller. I'm thinking about the structure of the interventional opportunities. In the absence of a court-appointed parenting coordinator, how can a professional with direct access to only one of the parties try to create a forum for such discussions?
Allison?
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking when you have direct access to only one of the parents. So, you know, the difficulty there is when you have direct access to only one party, you tend to only hear one side, right? The nature of much co-parenting work is about emphasizing the job of parenting together. And if you're not in the same room having the same conversation, even if you are having independent conversations, they are transparent, no secrets. And the goal always is to get these two people to remember that they created this family and their job is to make decisions together. So the role of a parenting coordinator, although obviously ideally it is best done as a neutral court-appointed role, parents can also stipulate to parenting coordination. It doesn't require that the court make that assignment. They can actually make an agreement recognizing that they need someone, and someone in a stronger role than a mediator, someone to help them navigate through conversations relative to their agreements. So that might be a possibility. In which case, again, if you only have direct access to one of the parents, you can work with that parent to suggest to the other that the need for a third-party forum would benefit both of them. That there's a recognition that they're getting stuck. And that one way to get unstuck is to, again, go out into the community and bring somebody in who can act in some kind of balancing role between the two of them.
Great. Another question, this is from Susan Kiernan. I apologize for the specific nature of this question. How do you help foster a good co-parenting relationship with a high conflict couple where dad has a highly variable work schedule and wants no set schedule, just the child on demand? Mom wants as little contact as possible.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, there is a wealth of literature on working with high conflict couples. And responding in a more generalized way, because the specifics would require more information, in part about why mom wants as little contact as possible, which could turn out to be really important and quite reasonable on her part. Wanting to have no schedule and wanting to have children on demand is not an uncommon position for people who have really erratic work schedules. It's a very difficult one, though, because it builds in a level of unpredictability into not only one person's life, but the entire family's life. And people usually balk at unpredictability. We all like to feel, even if it's an illusion, that we have some measure of control over our lives. And now more than ever, I think we're all being challenged with that idea. But to feel that there's no scaffolding framework for who has access when is often an untenable arrangement. And thus the negotiation needs to be around those are sort of extreme polarities, right? I want the children on demand. I don't want contact with this other parent at all. Okay, so how do we then come to some more middle ground? Because neither extreme is actually reasonable, and might not even, pass muster with a given court jurisdiction as being tenable. So the work then is to try to help people understand that that particular vision that they have for how they're going to share parenting time is fraught with being inefficient and unpredictable, therefore not likely to be successful, likely to breed more problems, and to try to build something more stable for them.
And I would add that, to go back to that question, if you put yourself in your child's shoes, how would your child feel about that situation? Children definitely do better with structure and routine, and you are expecting your child to adapt to the whims of these differences on an ongoing basis. What is it going to be like for the child? How are they going to feel about it? How are they going to adapt? If the father thinks about it from the child's perspective, he may be able to understand that this may not be in the best interest of the child and back off some.
This question is from Michelle Browning. How do you suggest addressing the needs of high-risk and immunocompromised household members while putting the child's needs at the center is one perspective? Outside of the current crisis, their needs aren't the only factor that has to be considered.
So absolutely, the children's needs are not the only factor that has to be considered. And that was part of what I raised in the introduction to this conversation, right? Is even though the perspective of the courts is that children should have free and open access to both of their parents, and this pandemic is not an excuse for interference in that, that when you have a more unusual situation, and I used the example of a parent who's a first responder, but certainly when you have immunocompromised household members is another lovely example of that. I think these times require open, curious, and creative conversations. Yeah. I think those are the words that I would use over and over again, right? The more that people give into fear, the more that they give into an amygdala hijack, if you will, from a neuroscience perspective, the less good they're actually going to do their families, and the more unhappy these kids are going to be. So, every family is unique, and every family's circumstances to some extent is unique. And parents have to be able to engage their frontal lobes and engage in discussions about the specifics of their family, the specifics of their children. We are not textbook. We are unique individuals living in very unique times. Without being able to talk about these things, people will only rely on reactive behavior. And reactive behavior almost always takes people down a pretty negative path. So I think if one has very specific circumstances in one's own family or household that need to be considered, that is a conversation that is required. And if people can't have it one-to-one, parent to parent, then they need to know that they can get help to have that conversation, and that there's a wide range of helping professionals out there to help them have that conversation.
I totally agree with what Allison is saying. These challenges are not right and wrong issues. It rarely is about one parent being right and the other being wrong. It's about all the shades of nuances of the culture that we're dealing with, the realities that we're dealing with right now, and the differences within the parents within this family. And so the best alternative is to learn those communication skills, bring in an expert who could help them negotiate and come up with the best win-win solutions they can, the best realistic solutions. Leaving it to the courts is never in the best interest of a family. Families are always better off making decisions themselves and finding solutions that work and adapt to their family dynamic, because no two families are the same. And the outcomes are going to be more amenable to everyone. And you could tweak and fine tune and be flexible about the outcome. So if something isn't working perfectly, then in 2 months we could tweak it again. this is the living arrangements for our family and our kids. As they grow, things change in addition to the changes on the outside world. So parents need to get accustomed to the fact that they have to be talking and communicating with one another, mastering those skills, and not letting other people make decisions for them that are never going to be in the best interest of the entire family in the same way as when they make that decision.
And to piggyback on that, Rosalind, totally, we're like really in sync here. It's an opportunity, I think, for both of us to make a pitch for collaborative divorce and mediation, right? Like, absolutely. This is the time. If there was ever a golden opportunity for families to look away from courthouses and toward alternative dispute resolution, this is the time. And probably it will be the time for a long time to come, because even when the courts do reopen, they are going to be so backlogged and challenged with how to move through that backlog. People need to remember, as you just said, Rosalind, that they will always be better off making decisions about their families if they are the decision makers. If they are too willing to hand off decision making to somebody in a robe, it's going to be a very different kind of decision, and not necessarily one that they're going to like, right? Absolutely. So this is the time.
Yeah, which brings me to the last question I was going to bring up, which is, what are our children going to say about how we handle the divorce and how we handle the pandemic when they're grown adults? Because children hold their parents accountable. They are angry, they are resentful, they disassociate with their parents sometimes when they aren't happy with what happened in the family. And we have an opportunity to educate all of these co-parents into the fact that these are decisions that have emotional and psychological consequences for everyone in the family, especially the children. This is the time to do it right. And there's so much help that's going to move families in the best direction. I also have a free webinar on YouTube, how to successfully co-parent your kids long after your divorce. And if you just go to Child-Centered Divorce on YouTube, you can see that half-hour webinar, or share it with any of your clients, because it just gets them into this same mindset that we've been talking about.
So very quickly, our last question. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We have 7 minutes left and we're gonna end on this one. This is from Shanna Pfeiffer. How do you create a level of communication when there's a tremendous imbalance? One parent demonstrates emotional intelligence and insight, and the other parent has limited insight and is very reactive.
I think that example is an example that all of us see all of the time. It is certainly a non-coronavirus specific example. And it may be exacerbated by the current circumstances, right? So the parent who tends to be very reactive anyway may really be exceedingly reactive now. And the parent who demonstrates insight and, that emotional intelligence, maybe is someone who can see the broader picture now in a more grounded way. So, one of the lovely things about working in a collaborative divorce model, although a lot of us who are trained as divorce coaches trained in a one-coach model, the original model for interdisciplinary collaborative divorce was a two-coach model. And that meant that each parent could work with a coach. And the two coaches and the two parents worked together on the parenting plan. And this kind of imbalance might be a situation in which using that two-coach model could be hugely beneficial, because each parent could be helped to be heard and understood. And parent with the insight, could also potentially come across as, I don't know, overbearing in some way, knowing it all in some way, and might need to be held back a little bit so that the parent who is demonstrating less insight and a greater emotional reactivity actually has a chance to calm down and might be able to step forward from a calmer place to say what they need to say or ask for what they need to ask for, right? And if you have two professionals in the room, it's like creating a container of calmer energy for those two people to come into a better alignment with one another.
I agree with that very much. And just wanted to add one other perspective, and that is it's helpful to find something you can agree about with your co-parent, as difficult as that may be. Some things, some one or two things that they are doing right, catch them doing something right and acknowledge it, compliment them for that. Because very often we have people on the defensive who go into interactions with their other co-parent already on the defensive, and no one makes wise, conscious decisions when they're on the defensive. So finding some things that you could acknowledge that is good about your co-parent, that your child is benefiting from with the co-parent, is helpful in starting negotiations, because you're not just there to barrage them with a slew of things that they're doing wrong. Everyone wants to feel heard, everyone wants to feel acknowledged. And if there's some small way that you can do that to start, it just helps the negotiation move in a better direction.
Yes.
Great. So with that, Allison, Rosalind, thank you so very much. This was we could keep going. If none of us had anything else to do the rest of this afternoon, we'd keep going. Thank you so much for your insight, for all of your advice, and for just sharing your expertise with all of us. Everybody else, thank you so much for attending. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. I know a few of you sent me a few messages about the Bronx decision that Allison referred to. I will send that over. The YouTube video that Rosalind referred to, I will send that over. I recorded this, so I will send this over too. But thank you so much. This was just such an important conversation to have and to keep having, because everything's changing and we're all doing the best we can. So thank you, Rosalind, Allison, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.